Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third Game Drive Online Ask Me Anything session in our hopefully famous, at least industry famous series of Game Drive educational sessions, which are open to literally everyone. We don't really care about the size of the team, your experience level. We just want you to learn as much as possible about mobile game development and publishing. As usual, my name is Anton Gorodetsky. I'm the head of industry relations at My Games. Some of you who have been visiting our previous sessions, both online and offline, may already know me, and the speakers we have today as well. I'll be a host. And before we start, let me say a couple of words about Game Drive. So this is My Games business platform for sharing the knowledge, communicating with the industry experts and investors as well for mobile game developers, which we launched back in 2020. And this year, the program is powered by our dearest partners, Amazon Web Services for Games. We have, by the way, Mike today from AWS, Google, Data AI, the Constructor of Fun, Game Analytics, and many, many more. And we've prepared a great program for this season in a way that is extremely, hopefully, again, beneficial and practical for you and insightful. And I'm pretty sure, and we are certain that today's event will bring you a lot of valuable insights. For the first time ever, I've already mentioned that, by the way, Game Drive is in its hybrid format. So we've been doing this strictly online before. This year, we have already had 2 offline sessions. The first one was back in May in the amazing city of Malmö, Sweden, during Nordic. And then the second one was like last week at Moby Dictum in the amazing city of Istanbul. And raise your hand or drop a comment in the chat whether anyone has been there, because it was very, I see one. Yeah, so the format is hybrid for the first time ever. We are holding both online and offline educational and networking events throughout this year. We're going to have some more until the end of 2023. So please do visit Game Drive website, gamedrive.com, for more information on the next sessions. So today, as announced earlier, we'll be talking about a very important and paramount thing, really, in the business of mobile games, which is gaming analytics. We'll discuss the tips and tricks of running successful A/B tests, various approaches to data analysis and hypothesis testing with amazing, beautiful people and seasoned professionals of, once again, Amazon Web Services. I keep mentioning Game Economist podcast. Really sorry about this. You can correct this whatever you feel like. I know you represent another entity, but I do feel sorry for mentioning the pod. Hopefully,
no, we do have a podcast, so that's the thing. But Game Economist Consulting is Phil's thing. Although we work pretty intimately together.
Sure. I'm pretty sure Phil is okay with that, though. And finally, last but not least, Game Analytics. Hi, Alison.
Hello.
Let's go through a couple of technical details. I know you guys may be already tired of me a little bit and you want to feel the wisdom. But anyway, we got to do this. So each speaker session will take approximately 20 minutes, more or less. Then we'll have a Q&A session right afterwards. So please prepare your questions. Do not hesitate to ask them by using this little awesome Q&A section. Or you can actually do this in chat, but it would be easier and more comfortable for us and for the speakers to check it in the Q&A section. You may see this in the bottom panel of the Zoom call interface. Let me finally welcome our speakers of today. So we have charming Alison Billis, who is CEO of Game Analytics, and she's going to be talking about using data to optimize your game performance. Welcome, Alison, and thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And then we're having Christopher. Oh, Christopher, it's going to be tough for me, man.
Kaczmarczyk Smith.
Kartmarsik Smith, who is once again a member of the Game Economist cast and also working for ATMT Inc. And Chris is going to be talking about the ABCs of A/B testing. There's a little word pun here. Finally, Chris, thank you so much. Welcome. And finally, we have Mike, dear friend of mine, Mike Shannon, who is the solutions architect from AWS for games. He's going to be talking about A/B tests and sharing the case studies. So as practical as it gets.
Thank you for having me here.
Sure. Thank you so much, man. Allison, you can start.
Good.
Looking forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Let me take over here. Great. All right, thank you for that introduction and for having me here today. We're excited about the Game Drive effort. I think it's really great to be disseminating information like this within the industry. I love how we share and share alike. So it's great to be here. I appreciate it a lot. I am Allison. I'm from Game Analytics. Just as an introduction to me, I've had 12 years of experience in the mobile games industry, always in roles around data and insights. So I've been hands-on, as an analyst, working with some great games, as you can see here. I've also worked for tech and service providers, and I'm currently the COO at Game Analytics. So I hope you get a sense that this topic is near and dear to my heart. Data really comes into play no matter where you're at in the development cycle for your game. From pre-launch, it's all about getting ready to go to market, showing that initial traction for funding, publishing if you need that. But otherwise, it's about making sure your game will have an audience around this marketability. Ensuring your gameplay runs smoothly and as attended. I have a ton of stories around this where things are just sometimes broken or not working as you would like, and you can see that through data. Preparing your pricing and monetization strategies as well as a use of data in the pre-launch phase. Once your game is out the door, data remains relevant, and then it becomes all about broadening your understanding of your players and allocating your resources accordingly. So knowing which features to prioritize, understanding what levers to pull with your players as they are engaging with your content. Running live ops data is very integral to the live ops process in making personalized experiences for your players. And then addressing community feedback. Data really helps to put context to loud feedback that you might be getting from your players. All of this comes down to two major things working with data. The first thing is speeding up your decision making. So data and KPIs don't make the decision for you per se, unless it's in a AI model. But data in this context helps you know which way to go and helps your decision-making process. This seems really simple, but we often hear studios who are putting in game analytics for the first time saying that it's such a relief to them to have some data flowing because they're no longer flying blind in their development. It gives them confidence really to move past blockers that they have and speeds up their whole process. The other part too, and big benefit of being data-driven is around creating a great experience for your players. That's why we're here. So this is what's most exciting to me for sure, is using data to inform your decisions and then creating a more polished product in the end. So how exactly do we get from data to these valuable insights? The building blocks here, of course, are the data itself. So getting your game client to send that raw data, such as when a user starts or ends a session, when an in-app purchase is made, and then organizing that data into a structured format in terms of KPIs. This is kind of the boring stuff. I've spent 12 years building data pipelines, making sure data is clean. There are definitely systems that will do this for you, like Game Analytics, and of course, there are others as well. I think what is more interesting is actually moving on and kind of up this pyramid, if you will, into the stage of knowledge. So this is about analyzing and interpreting the information you have in front of you to uncover patterns, trends, and anomalies with the goal of finding what's features are most impactful in your game and what the attributes are of your most valuable players. This stage also encompasses A/B testing, so I am looking forward to hearing more about the details of A/B testing. And game analytics has an A/B testing framework, I should say. But I think that when you are starting out with data, it's actually more important to look holistically at what's happening with your players rather than diving into specific tests. That said, A/B testing is still important, so we will get there with the next couple of people talking as well. Running an A/B test and doing the analysis, the purpose of that as well is to get to the final stage of this pyramid, which is wisdom. So taking action on the knowledge that you've garnered from this analysis in order to do things like prioritizing your feature development, allocating resources to specific ads or specific areas of your business. And really the holy grail of the data process is around segmentation and tailoring your gameplay experience to individual players. So I think that's a really interesting thing to be aiming for. Just to say that the numbers themselves really have no way of speaking for themselves. I love this quote by Nate Silver. If you know him, he's in the political realm. We are the ones that bring the meaning to the data. And this is what the knowledge and wisdom stages are really about. So today, the goal is to help move you towards that wisdom stage, if you will, in your data journey. We're going to do that, or I will. The context of my talk is about breaking down these core pillars of success in games. And of course, these are acquisition, which is all about bringing players into your game in the first place, engagement, keeping your users active once you have them and interested in your game and content, and then turning those users into revenue through monetization. So I'm going to go through each of these pillars and define a hero metric for you, give you some benchmarks as well to compare against, and then give you some optimization strategies for each area as well. So let's get into acquisition first. Acquisition is a starting point for you. This is where you're introducing players to your game's unique experience. And what you want to see is players coming in. So new users is your hero metric here. Now, this is how many users are discovering your app, downloading your game, and playing it. And of course, the sky is the limit. The more players, the better. But I do want to caution that more players doesn't always mean better. So rather than look at new users in total, it's important to break this down in terms of source. So where your players are coming from. And this could be your organic or paid, but also specifically for paid users, looking at which channel, which campaign, and which ad they're coming from. And then what behavior they do after you've acquired them. But I'll get into more of that in the next stages. It can help to compare your number of new users to returning users as well, to get an understanding of if your ecosystem within your game is working. Of course, at the launch, this is just a heuristic, but you will have a lot of new users, the large majority of them. Really a healthy benchmark to get to, or kind of an equilibrium that we see that also reflects that you have good retention of users, is this 30 to 70 split of 30% new. You've got a healthy flow of new users coming in and downloading your game. And then you have the stable user base of about 70% returning. So this is something to keep in mind as you're launching your games in terms of where you want to get to with that stable player base. And this brings us to engagement, of course. These things are very related, all three pillars, I would say. But it is equally important to ensure your players are active in your game, particularly when you're paying for them in the first place and putting cash on the table. The hero metric here is retention. This is the number of new users who return to your game after a certain number of days or a certain period of time. So high retention indicates that your game is providing value and you're building up that loyal user base over time. In terms of benchmarks, Game Analytics tracks 100,000 games every month, so across all platforms and genres. So we've got this great view into what works for games in terms of these KPIs. Recently, we were looking at this difference between casual games and hyper-casual games, a hot topic in mobile, of course, right now. And we pulled these benchmarks. These are particularly for games that have over 1 million monthly active users. So they're actually more in the mature point in their life cycle. But I wanted to point this out that these two curves are not different. The casual and hyper casual retention profiles are pretty much the same. What is different, and this is just to give you a bit of again, a benchmark to try to get to. I would say at the beginning, when you're launching a game, these numbers likely need to be higher because you're working with your first golden cohorts, if you will. The first users that you're getting into your game are going to be better in terms of how they retain. But then over time, you're going to see your retention numbers kind of plateau and get to some base level. So this is a good benchmark to be considering. What does differ between casual games and hyper casual games, just to round out this story, is actually in session length in terms of engagement. So we see the higher end here being a difference between 22 minutes versus 37 minutes for hyper casual versus casual. And when you multiply this out, your session lengths plus your times your sessions per DAU, this is a pretty big amount of time. So 2 hours more in total gameplay per day for casual games, that they have a much longer period of time where they can inspire their users to spend money in their game and also have the opportunity to show ads in their game. So I thought this was interesting. And again, a benchmark for you to try to understand what you should be aiming for. So monetization, our third pillar, this is turning your users into revenue through all of the different sources. So that's ads, in-app purchases, subscriptions, etc. The hero metric here is lifetime value, or LTV. This is the total amount of revenue generated for each user through their lifetime of engaging with your game. And with LTV, you understand the value that each user is bringing to your game, and what it helps you do is ensure that you're profitable. So benchmarks for LTV vary a lot. It depends on the genre that you're making, the monetization models that you're using, but what is most important with LTV is that it is greater than your cost to acquire users. This means you're running a sustainable business, which is, again, what we're all going for. So in terms of LTVs, I did want to provide this basic calculator for you. There are a lot of methodologies for projecting out LTV, and I think what's difficult about it is that you are projecting out LTV. So you're going to know your users are coming in. You might know some of their behavior on day 1, day 7 retention, for example. But what you're trying to do is understand how much value are they going to bring me by day 90 or by some payback period that you're looking for. I used the area under the curve method for this, just so you know, but it's a basic calculator for you to dig into so you can see some of the levers that you have. There is a tab in the spreadsheet here that links to some other resources around calculating LTV in different ways, why it's important. So I wanted to provide this, and I hope it's helpful for you. So now we have 3 hero metrics, which are really just the beginning of your analysis. So considering some additional metrics, you will start to gain a more comprehensive understanding of your game's performance and your players, and that is what really moves you towards that step of wisdom. I like this interview with Owen Mahoney, the CEO of Nexon. He's talking about running a successful games business and running live ops, and he said it's all about getting 1,000 little things right, which I think is very righteously said in terms of data. It really is an ongoing process working with data that requires a proactive approach and a willingness to adapt. I know that we're, in the games industry, we're also artists and creative, but working with data requires that you're flexible around that and you're reacting to your player feedback, which is essentially what a KPI is. If you really break it down, your KPIs are user feedback and something to be taking action on. So in the next slides, I will go into each of the 3 pillars again, particularly to show you some ideas around how to refine these things. I'm going to show you some more metrics and some ideas for optimizing these things. But I want to say it in this context that the knowledge and wisdom steps that you will get to in your data journey are very personal for you. So which direction you want to go. There's 1,000 little things you can look at. So it is up to you to try to dig in and understand what's most important for your specific game. So all of those caveats aside, let's start with acquisition. So in terms of improving acquisition efforts, again, you want to narrow down on what channels and campaigns and individual ads are working best for you and bringing in the most quality users. The best way to look at this in terms of an apples to apples way is to look at conversion rates. So conversion rates can be most basically based on install, so making sure that you're getting an install in the first place from your ads, but you can also set conversion to be things like making an in-app purchase or completing a level. This is up to you to decide and figure out what is most meaningful for your game. If your conversion rates are not working for any reason, you need to refine the targeting and your messaging in your ads. And you can tailor your marketing and campaigns to specific user segments based on demographics, interests, behaviors, in order to deliver a more personalized message. And I do realize, I say that understanding that we have a lot of changes that have just happened with, well, not just, but that we're all adapting to in terms of SCAN, in terms of the upcoming privacy sandbox with Google as well. So I understand that the measurement behind this is changing quite a bit right now. But when optimizing your ads, it's all about showing those unique selling points of your game. And I think the industry has moved forward quite a bit, especially with these changes in targeting, actually, that we are trying to sell our specific games and the unique experiences that we have within them and trying to deepen that retention curve. So making sure that the ads are reflective of what the player is going to get once they get in the door is, of course, the more optimal strategy here with your UA. I also want to point out just the App Store presence. So not to be forgotten that optimizing your App Store presence is also a big driver of acquisition in this pillar. So enhancing your game's visibility, discoverability by tinkering with your title, keywords, description, screenshots, your icons, keeping this all fresh is very important as well when addressing this pillar. So engagement is our next pillar to dive into, and I would say this is my most favorite area to dig into because it looks holistically at how players are interacting with your game's features and your content. And this is probably the most bespoke analysis you can do, the most tailored to your specific game. So just starting at the bottom of the list here, it's things like level completion, win rates, your in-game economy, sinks and sources, and all of the different player interactions that you have in your game. Those are very specific to you. When I look at it across all of the games that we track with game analytics, everyone does it in a slightly different way. And that's because the games are all slightly different. So it's just to say that this part in particular is very bespoke. Backing up a little bit in terms of trying to fix those retention numbers that we talked about as your hero metric. To optimize retention, you need to be looking first and foremost at your first-time user experience. So you need to evaluate the onboarding steps that your players are going through to identify those drop-off points. I think your first-time user experience is the biggest, once they're in the game, is the biggest driver of retention and most important to smooth out for your users. I should say that a first-time user experience, you typically look at it in a funnel. And these funnel steps don't necessarily have to be a tutorial, for example. Playing around with what exactly you want your players to step through is an important thing when looking at these numbers here. Just a little hint that a lot of games look at how many levels the players have completed. So one of the funnel steps will be that they've completed level 10, for example, and that's very indicative for many games of how the long-term retention will look for certain players. On this slide, I also want to call out the NUR, CUR, and RUR, the new user return rates, current user return rates, and returning user return rates. This is a concept that helps you to dive further into those retention numbers to understand of my base that I have today, how many are new, current, or returning. Particularly that returning metric is interesting to look at and something that people don't optimize for. You do want to make sure that your players come back and that you reheat them at some point as well. If they've left your game for some period of time, bringing them back a second time to get started again is typically better than acquiring a new user. The last pillar for diagnosing and optimizing is monetization. With optimization, I encourage you to look at the different revenue sources again in your game. So where is your money coming from in the first place? And how are each of those sources performing for you? I think the balance of ads versus in-app purchases is something to consider. It's a strategic consideration as you're building out a game, but it's also a consideration once you see players interacting with one or the other. You might find that you want to put more effort into optimizing your in-app purchases versus your ads based on how your players are interacting with these things. The frequency of in-app purchases as well is an important metric here. Not just are any players spending money in the first place, but how often are they making purchases at all? And typically, smaller purchases are better than infrequent large purchases. So you want them happening often and small. That's a much better indicator, actually, of retention of these players. Rather than spending all their money and leaving, they're going to stay with you longer and likely spend more if they're making smaller purchases over time. You can see some of the optimization strategies here in terms of playing with promotional offers, bundles, these things. There's a whole art in this, I would say, that is fun to play around with and fun to see what works best for your players. Ad monetization is also an important revenue source, not to forget that. You can experiment with different ad placements, your frequency. The goal is to find the right balance between showing ads and player engagement. So keeping an eye on how your advertising behavior impacts your engagement is important as you're optimizing these things. That is everything I have for you today. I hope the resources will be helpful, and I'm also looking forward to the questions once the other speakers have gone through their slides as well.
Of course, Alison, thank you so much. If you had a chance to check out the chat, people do really love the insights. You got to check the chat.
Super, I will. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for the QRs and the links. I'm actually seeing someone sharing a link to the LTV calculator. So thank you for that. And all the presentations will be available, and the recording will be available as well. So guys, do not be worried about that. Once again, Alison, that was very informative, and hopefully people have been taking notes. And now, yes, you may ask your questions into the Q&A section or the chat. The speakers will be able to answer them a little bit later. And now, let's dive deeper into the A/B testing. So I'm passing the mic to Chris, who will cover the ABC of A/B testing. Chris.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to try and get this over on a different screen. How's that? Is that working? Okay. Well, I think it's kind of a happy accident that all of these presentations lead into the next one really, really wonderfully. So Alison just did an incredible job at explaining what are some of the KPIs, what are some of the metrics by which you're able to judge the quality of your product or the success of a product. So that kind of leads perfectly into the discussion of A/B testing. And the quote that she used also, with respect to a million things is really appropriate for A/B testing, because in A/B testing, we're typically trying to measure the impact of an incremental change. And those incremental changes end up adding up over time to create a really strong, powerful impact in your environment. So I've kind of fudged with the title of this presentation, and I'm calling it the building blocks of A/B testing. So the point and the theme of this presentation is really to try to empower everyone in an organization from the bottom to the top on how to create a good A/B test and what does a good A/B test look like. So my goal at the end of this presentation is for really anybody. You could be an audio designer all the way up to a CEO and get a much better idea of, hey, this is how we produce better A/B tests, because I'm a big advocate, especially for smaller studios, that corporate buy-in, organizational buy-in is really important to running good A/B tests. So without further ado, my name is Chris. I have my PhD in economics from Purdue University. There I studied video game economics, experimental economics, and labor economics. And now I mostly do design work and data work within the company, but I also do a little bit of revenue. So obviously the intersection of data and revenue is kind of where A/B testing shines. In my spare time, outside my day job, I write academic articles, blog posts, and podcasts with a couple of friends, the Game Economist Cast with Philip Black and Eric Guan. I also co-chair the IGDA Game Economics Special Interest Group. So if you have any fascination with game economics at all, please join that. Ping me afterwards. I should have had a cool QR code for you guys to take a picture of that'll link you right to the Discord. And I did some last minute editing, Allison, and added some QR codes throughout my presentation because all I had was links, which are useless to people watching. So anyway, let's hop in with a small introduction to A/B testing. A/B testing is really just experimentation. It's the idea of trying to test a new feature and compare the new feature to the old feature. And this is an experimental setup. So an experimental setup has a control, a treatment, and an outcome. And Allison's presentation really went into the outcome here. What are your KPIs? What are the things that matter to you as an organization? And are you measuring those properly? If you are, and you've got this established product, you might want to do an A/B test. So the control is an incumbent option. It's an incumbent feature or product. And the treatment is something new, something you're trying to test the efficacy of or how it's going to change your environment. Excuse me. So the key to a good experiment, or I guess the first building block to a good experiment is having a hypothesis. So I'm going to have a running kind of experiment in the background that we're going to be thinking about. And this is changing the color of a button in an in-app purchase interface. So I coded this interface myself. So if you need any UI, UX, expertise, definitely don't reach out to me because you can see this is as well as I can do it. So we've got the incumbent option, which is A. This is our control. This is a green button that says buy the power up. And then we've got our option B, which is our treatment. This is the thing we're trying to test. We're trying to add in this new feature, which is a blue button, and see if that increases or decreases our in-app purchase. Now we've got a hypothesis, which is just a statement. And we're going to try to test the statistical validity of that statement by running an A/B test. Before we jump into kind of the building blocks, so I call them, I want to give you guys my personal golden rule when I'm thinking about A/B testing, when I'm thinking about experimentation, and that is that an A/B test is all about optimizing your product in a seemingly small way that's actually going to lead to long-term growth. So one of the keys, at least in my experience, to creating a good A/B test is to think small first and don't think big first. So you kind of want to think about the smallest possible change you could make, because when you have big giant changes, you end up with a slew of problems. Now, this could be anything from mismeasurement to contamination or bias. And these are things you don't want in your tests because they're not going to give you a reliable result. And we'll talk all about reliability of results throughout the presentation. So what are the ABCs? So there are kind of three categories that I'm putting all the building blocks into. The first category is going to be to align the goals of the organization. And this is going to involve the corporate buy-in building block, the evaluation criterion building block, and the feasibility building block. And then you have build the experiment. This is the next category. And this is going to really be where the meat of conversation today is going to be. We're going to talk about running a power analysis, running what I call a treatment analysis, and sampling your observations, trying to make sure that you have a good, strong foundation for the experimental nature of your test. And then the final kind of all-encompassing section here is the C, calculate the results. This is where you're actually going to identify the effect and the statistical validity of that effect in the calculate results section. Now, I'm a huge advocate, and in my view, the point of this presentation is to emphasize parts A and part B, because you will not be able to properly identify results if you haven't done a good job at building a successful experiment and getting proper corporate buy-in. So I'm going to put a lot of emphasis in this conversation about making sure that you build your experiment properly and trying, again, to empower those people who might not necessarily be the ones actually running the calculations at the end, but they're important and they're a part of the whole journey, because an A/B test involves all sorts of different departments within an organization. There's an excellent review of online A/B testing, which is more general than just A/B testing in video games, by Kohavi and Longbottom. It's a recent review. Pretty much everything you'd want to know about A/B testing is going to be in that review, and it'll branch off to many different wonderful places. So the aligned goals building blocks, these are organizational buy-in from the top to the bottom of the organization. Organizational buy-in is really just making sure that everybody is on the same page and everybody wants to run an experiment. I've been a part of projects where one person wants to run an experiment and one person doesn't. This is also a stage where you try to establish whether or not it's a good time to run an experiment. Something that Allison was pointing out was, you might have some metrics, you might have a product, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're at the stage where you're trying to optimize everything. You might still be just trying to get your KPIs and understand your environment. So that's the organizational buy-in. You need to make sure that everybody's on the same page about, we want to run a successful A/B test. And again, that goes from the top of the organization to the bottom of the organization, because everybody's going to get involved in this. The second building block for the aligned goals section is that you're making sure that everyone has the same goal. So you might have everybody who says, yeah, we want to run an A/B test, we're ready for an A/B test, but you want to make sure that everyone has the same criterion in mind. And this is something called the overall evaluation criterion, or the OEC. And this is the thing, this is kind of the guiding metric for the organization. This is what we want our A/B test to get at. Do we want it to get at user acquisition? Do we want it to get at revenue? Or do we want it to get at perhaps improving the product? So we want to have some sort of OEC within the organization that is the goal. Because if we all have different objectives, we all have different goals, we're not going to create a successful A/B test, because it's probably going to be all over the place. And when you have an A/B test that's a treatment that's all over the place, it's very difficult to properly identify the impact of the treatment. And then finally, the final building block in the align goals section is technical feasibility. This is where you make sure that, first things first, you need to have some sort of data pipeline. You need to make sure that you can actually measure the impact of the treatment in your environment. If you don't have your data pipelines in place, there's no point at even coming close to trying to run an A/B test. And then product bandwidth. Product bandwidth is to just make sure that it's feasible to do the change you want to do. So for example, changing the button from green to blue, that's a pretty easy change. It's low lift. It's going to not really be a huge technical lift on the product side. But you need to make sure that your product team is aligned with you, especially for smaller organizations. So I wanted to quickly kind of go over the anatomy of an experiment. I had mentioned earlier that there are three core components to an experiment, and that is the hypothesis, which is just a statement that you're going to test the statistical validity of. So this is a statement that's going to be, it's a declarative statement, and you want to test the treatment, in this case, the treatment effect of your new feature, and you want to say whether or not you think it's likely that this thing is telling you the truth, that this treatment effect is accurate or is reliable. Okay, so that's the hypothesis. This is really the big question. What are we getting after in the hypothesis? And it's important that you have a good hypothesis where the metric is very clear what you're measuring. It's not ambiguous. Like revenue is kind of an ambiguous measure. Maybe we want to improve, in-app purchase conversion. That's a much more clear metric. And then also making sure that the treatment is clear. You want to have, we're going to make the UI better. That's not a very clear treatment. We need a very specific objective or treatment, like turning the button from green to blue. The treatment itself, this is the thing that's going to change. This is the new feature that you're going to roll out, and you're going to try to test against the old feature, the control. And then the metric. This is the thing by which you're going to measure the treatment effect. And this is your KPI. This is the thing that you're trying to improve. This is your not your North Star metric necessarily, but this is going to be something like maybe, in-app purchase conversion or retention. So this next section, building the experiment, this is where a lot of the meat of designing good A/B tests are going to come in. Now, the previous section was just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Like I said, if you don't have A, you're not going to get B. And if you don't have B, you're definitely not going to get C. So for build the experiment, we're going to run a power analysis, and I'll get into each of these individually in the following slides. We're going to make sure that we are measuring the correct observation, and we're running the experiment for a good amount of time. We're also going to analyze the treatment and where it's going to impact our player base. And finally, we want to make sure that we're properly randomizing our units into treatment and control. So a power analysis is relatively straightforward, and there's a lot that could be said on this topic, but for the purposes of this conversation, I wanted to just give you kind of a brief overview. And I also wanted to provide some links. So these are my QR codes that I've added right before the presentation here, but there are two kind of good resources for looking at what is the possible treatment effect that you could accurately measure given the size of your sample, the number of people that are in your sample. What is the proper, what's the feasible size of the effect that you could reasonably detect? Okay, so you might have a sample of 100 people and get some treatment effect of, oh, it improved metric XYZ by 2%. Well, you want to make sure that you're running this experiment with enough people that the treatment is reliable, or the treatment effect is reliable. So this 2%, we're very confident. So these two resources over here, you're going to plug in some features about not only your data but also your sample, and it's going to tell you either, given a percentage change that you want to detect, what's the cohort size you need to collect for your sample for the treatment and control, or it's going to say, I have a cohort size, I have the sample that I'm looking for. And this option down here is more common for smaller studios that have a limited number of people that could be in the experiment. And it's going to spit out, here's the largest percentage change or treatment effect that you can reliably detect. And when I say reliably, I mean that you can statistically significantly detect a change. So the power analysis is important because it lets you know kind of beforehand, what's the percentage change that I can reasonably detect? And it gets us grounded. It makes us realize, okay, we're only really going to be able to detect a 3% change here. And that's very powerful, especially if the feature that you're interested in rolling out has a cost associated with it, a marginal cost associated with it. You need to make sure that you need to be able to detect a 4 percentage point change in order to overcome the cost. So this next slide is about observations and time. So pretty simple in video games because we have access to player profiles, but you want to make sure that you're identifying what is a single observation in your data set. So this could be an individual player profile, which is pretty typical, but it could also be a player session, or it could be a session ID or player time. So this is basically just make sure that you know what is it that you're measuring? Are you measuring one individual person coming in and making one decision, or something else? For web page visits, for example, this is a little bit more complicated because if somebody's using a VPN, they could come in with 2 different IP addresses in the same day. So it's difficult to keep track of people, and thus difficult to assign them to treatment and the control, which can contaminate results. In terms of timing, I have a chart over here that I just completely made up for 2 features. You have feature 1 and feature 2. And feature 1, you can see, has very few interactions per day. So customers are not encountering this feature very often. So let's say we want to collect 10,000 data points or something like that. We're going to need to run that for a very long time to collect the correct amount of data. For product 2, or for feature 2, people interact with this one all the time. And so we don't have to run the experiment necessarily for as long. We'll collect our data much more quickly. Now, the timing of the experiment is something that you're going to want to determine for yourself. This is going to be an organizational decision. So I'm not saying that the amount of sample that you need is directly related to the length of the experiment. Sometimes the length of the experiment will be determined by the type of feature that you're trying to test. There's more on this topic in Larson et al. 2023, which I'll have at the end of the presentation, and maybe I'll link in the comments after this. What's perhaps related to this concept of frequency, how often are people interacting with your feature, comes the treatment analysis. So the treatment analysis this is a term I think I made up. This is one of the most critical components to running a successful A/B test or designing a successful A/B test. And it's to basically make sure that you're testing the appropriate group of your customers with the A/B test. So I have a chart here that shows the density of players on the y-axis and the in-app purchase spend on the x-axis. So we could think of this as dollars spent on SKUs in your app. And obviously, at the low end of the spend category, we have this huge density of players. Most players don't spend a lot, and very few players spend a lot. So we have kind of this upside down logarithmic curve. So I have this band here, this red band that represents a treatment effect that we've decided to, or a treatment that we're deciding to employ. So this could be, we want to change we want to give a discount on a SKU, but this is a $10 SKU. Well, that $10 SKU, by changing it, we're only impacting a very small portion of our player base, first of all. And second of all, we might not even be getting at the change we want to detect. So let's say instead of we want to see what's the percentage change in in-app purchase spend, we might be saying what's the change in conversion to in-app purchase. So what this band is telling us when we kind of overlay it on our distribution is that, wait a minute, we're not actually measuring, we're not sampling the part of the population that is going to be most impacted by the treatment. So we might move it further over here and give it a smaller SKU, for example, if we want to do a discount. And we want to say, what happens if we discount our SKU by 50% and we give them a $1 SKU? This is not only going to improve the number of observations, the number of people, the frequency of people interacting with the treatment. It's also going to actually target the particular audience that we're trying to target with this treatment. We want to make sure that we are touching the people that we are trying to study. It doesn't help to try and study the marginal person with a treatment that's not impacting the marginal person. And there's a really interesting story that I'll tell at the end, or maybe in the Ask Me section on this. An alternative is to increase the the band of the treatment. Maybe you want to do a 50% discount on a whole bunch of SKUs. But I encourage you to kind of plot out whatever the distribution of the metric you're trying to observe. What does it look like? And then try and create a mental block over top of this distribution. Where am I impacting this? And that's going to allow you to make sure that you're impacting the type of the distribution, the part of the distribution you're trying to impact. Finally, and I'm excited for this slide because I spent a lot of time on it. This is the randomization slide and or building block of how to build an experiment, how to successfully build an experiment. Randomization is less of an issue the more observations you have. So if you're an Amazon or a Google, you're less worried about kind of some of these biases that can occur in randomization because you have so many individuals in your sample. Now, maybe Mike is gonna tell me, Chris, you're completely wrong. So I'll look forward to that part of his. But this is more of a concern for kind of smaller studios that maybe don't have hundreds of thousands or millions of people in a sample. Maybe you've got a couple thousand or a couple 10,000. What you can end up with, if you're pure randomizing, and pure randomization on the left here is where you have a list of all your players and you just sort them, that entire list, you sort them by control and treatment. And our green guys are getting the green button, they're the control, and the blue guys are getting the treatment. They're the treatment group. And we're just going to assign people 50-50 down the middle to control or treatment. And so what we end up with is we've actually oversampled the low category into our treatment group. So the low spend category has more of our treatment group relative to the control. And our high category has fewer treatment relative to our control. So what this means is that we've kind of, in the treatment group, we've oversampled the low spenders. Now, if this is a study about conversion, this could lead to bias in our results. For example, lower spenders are more likely, well, let's say you've got a zero spender, they're more likely to convert than somebody who's a high spender. In fact, a high spender can't convert. So this is an example of if we were to pure randomize like this, we would end up in a situation where we're getting a biased result for our treatment effect. What this means is that we are either going to overestimate or underestimate the impact of the new feature. Another option is to do within cohort randomization. Within cohort randomization is where you split your player bases up, your sample into two different categories. So you might do low spend, high spend. You can also do this geographically. You can also do this by any other type of descriptive that you define your players by. Spend is a really common one to do. So you might split them up into two groups: low spenders, high spenders. And first, you split the low spenders right down the middle, 50-50, control and treatment. And you get 4 and 4 in this group. And then you take your high spenders and you split them down the middle, 50-50, and you get 2 and 2. And then you combine them all together to make the ultimate sample. And what you end up with is a much more even randomization. Now, like I said before, the higher N is, or the higher the number of observations are in your experiment, the less of a problem this becomes. The final kind of category of the ABCs, or the building blocks, or whatever you prefer, of creating solid experimental design is to calculate the results. And this is actually the part of the presentation I'm going to spend the least amount of time on, because there are tons of awesome resources out there in terms of calculating the result, testing the statistical validity of the result. And I have this QR code that leads to a little Google Sheets. And in that Google Sheets, since I don't have time to go over it today, you're going to see the statistical validity of our result based on different sample sizes of the experiment. So I've got a statistical validity, which is basically what's called a p-value. And this thing, basically, the accuracy of our result gets better and better as we sample more and more people in that experiment. And I emphasize the fact that you can run these types of tests in Excel spreadsheets. And like I've said, I think 3 times up until this point, this step is only going to be as successful as your experimental design was in the first place. You can do all sorts of statistical gymnastics, but if you didn't have a good experimental design, you're not going to get good results. So I've got a list of statistical software here that you can use. And if you have any sort of data person, they're going to know what these are. But if you're very data not savvy, or you might even be using one of these companies already, there are a lot of excellent A/B testing services out there, like Game Analytics, of course, Dive, and Heroic Labs. In fact, I do want to emphasize there's an excellent Navic podcast that just came out with the CEO of Dive, and they kind of go over really the point of this whole entire session, in that, there's kind of a crisis of data analytics among small studios in the video games industry. So the calculate results section, use whatever tools you have necessary. If you're statistically, minded, if you have statistical training, maybe you just do this part yourself. Maybe you outsource it to a third party, or maybe you have an analyst who's able to do this. That's it for my presentation. Hopefully I kept it in time. I've got a couple of references here, but no QR codes.
Jesus, man. Wow, thank you, Chris. That's what you get, guys, for dealing with a PhD.
Oh, thank you. You're too kind.
Yeah, we have questions, and thank you guys so much to those who are sharing the links to the chat from the QR codes. This is very helpful. Special thank you. Chris, once again, wow, thank you so much. Allison and you both have done an amazing job. Yeah, let's once again, we're gonna have a Q&A session afterwards, so do not worry, anyone, that your questions may be missed. And yeah, we got to go on with the A/B testing thing. So Mike, the mic is yours. Sorry for the pun. And then we're going to go with the Q&A session.
Yeah, thank you, Anton. Hi, everyone. I'm Mikhail Ishenin. I'm a solutions architect in AWS. I work mostly with game tech customers, big ones, and my personal focus is analytics and AI. So it's not a coincidence that I'm here talking with you. Today, I will talk about the practical view on A/B testing mostly. So while before that, we were speaking about like theory. I'm a solution architect. I always on the intersection of theory and real hard enterprise practice. So I'll give you my point of view on A/B testing, why it is important. I'll give you an overview of how it's used in AWS. For example, I'll show you our AWS Activate console. I'll talk about A/B testing mechanics. How would you start the A/B testing at all if you are not doing it right now? And if the time would be okay, I will show you a quick demo of the instrument Amazon CloudWatch, evidently, which helps everyone start with A/B testing, like in hours, maybe. Okay, so let's dive in. First of all, I have to say that my first personal encounter with A/B testing was maybe 10 years ago, when this concept was kind of new, and everyone tried to do something with it. Not everyone succeeded, but I think as time goes, the whole approach gets more and more practical and more suitable for everyone, and even for like smaller studios or smaller products. So why are we doing A/B testing at all? My answer at this for this question is that the complexity of digital products is growing year over year. So the games right now, popular games, are really complex in terms of everything, in terms of game design, game virtual economics, architecture, technical architecture. I mean, even audience of who plays the game can be changing like year over year. So everything becomes more complex and fluid, let's say so. And given that, thinking about that, I think that no one can predict, not even like the smartest of product managers and producers can really predict the future in terms of at least three things. These things are, if the new update will work good enough. Will it work for the audience? Will it work for the channels, like user acquisition channels? Will it improve the retention or decrease the retention? Something like that. So even the best product managers are not like oracles. They have just guesses. And an important thing which I want to stress is that the updates, given the growing complexity, can touch several things, both on architecture side, so on product side, and inside the complex product. So the question is, will it really break or improve something? So it can influence game balance, game economy, or any like metrics. So we have to monitor it, and we have to test the new updates in a meaningful way, the way Christopher told us, like with statistical significance and all that stuff. So I'll show you what was the problem in AWS, with which included for which the answer was A/B testing. Yeah, just to set the stage. We have a program AWS Activate, and guys from my games, I think there are Activate providers also, as far as I remember. So you can go to them and get up to $100,000 in AWS credits. It's like an investment from AWS to you, to the companies, and together with credits, we give like a great support for those who receive those credits. So in fact, personally, I can help you with something with experiments and my colleagues, solutions architects. But we have a big library of resources and events which support AWS Activate partners. Well, not partners, but receivers, the AWS Activate credits. And we have like a big portal, which on the user side, which has a personalized recommendation feed, exclusive offers, Tech Hub, which is like also personalized technical resources based on what you use, what you want, and all that. And the problem with that part is that we have 200 or more than 200,000 startups who receive the credits. So it's really not obvious. So if we see the AWS console, it is just like that. So we have not much screen real estate to show you something meaningful, really for you. And this to show something meaningful, we have to do some personalization. Yeah, and we try to guess like personalized offers, personalized technical resources summary, and something like that. It's another story how to do the personalization. For our today's talk, what is really important is that we have like many resources of different types, and we have many answers to any technical question given the size of the amount of different solutions in AWS. And what we can do is build a recommender who will recommend you something. Yeah, it's a kind of obvious thing. And this recommender, you know, this task cannot be solved like in general. It generally involves several iterations, which like sort and select content for each and every of those who go to the portal, and to support them best. So we think about our users first. So we try and do different personalizers. So and while the first one was built, we know like baseline that well, let's say the conversion to the meaningful action is like just from top of my head, like 50%. And after that, team analyzes and gets with the hypothesis. Maybe if we change the algorithm there and there, we will grow this number to 60%, to 10% points. But how should we do it? Yeah, so the fact that before that we just didn't do location-based personalization. Now we added location-based personalization. How did it influence the whole result? And this is where the actual A/B testing comes to the first place. So there are several steps on how to do correct A/B testing, like in the real world. Let's start from the ground. First of all, we have to set up our architecture, like all our systems, which allows AA testing, in fact. So if we split our audience, something about Christopher already told, if we split our audience in half, we have to see the exact equal amount, you know, of any experiment we run. So the results should be identical. After that, what we do, we need to have some mechanism to split the audience. Here in A/B, but in fact, you can do a multivariate test if your traffic is okay. So you can test several different like options and select the best. So this is where we need like a special tool to do A/B testing. Before that, we could do everything in Excel and everything's fine on paper. But when we are getting to the actual data, we have to split the traffic and split it like to several buckets. So one bucket will see the old version of Recommender in that example. The other group will see the new version of Recommender. And we need to like shift the traffic to the version which wins. It would be great if it will be automatically. So when statistical significance is achieved, it's great that for the traffic to be shifted automatically at all. So this is how it looks like in one diagram. You are getting the groups, yeah, you're getting the statistical significant results, and you select the one which wins. So how to achieve this interesting picture? I know many companies and teams who start with like homegrown approach. So they're trying to do traffic routing and shifting from one side, from A to B or back, using their own API gateway. But there is a catch on this road. The catch is that the company stops being like a product company who builds games or whatever, or internet banking in my experience, and it becomes an A/B testing company. Especially when it is small, they have like 10 developers and 20% are doing an A/B testing something. And you know, the best code is the code you've never written. So if you write this kind of a tool, you will have to maintain it until sunset, until it's sunset. So I cannot recommend this system. Another approach is like third-party SaaS vendors. And we thought about it in Amazon, actually. Can we go with any of existing SaaS vendors? For you, the question could be, the answer could be different, but for us, the question was that they don't give too much control. So they are like focused on point and click interface, which is not sufficient for even for websites, but for games and for like backend code, it is a pain, really pain. And we, as a result, created a CloudWatch Evidently, which is super simple for the tech guys, not for point and click guys, like no code, low code. I'll show you a bit about that. And it is integrated highly into both front end and back end. You basically don't need to do anything. You just launch your experiment. Well, you wire up it into your front end and back end code first, for sure. But after that, you launch your experiment. You see the dashboards, and what's important, you can dive deep into the really source data. So if you don't believe like statistical significance and everything, which evidently shows you, you can calculate it yourself. And after the experiment has ended, you can automatically switch the traffic to the winning result and to see some significance point and all that stuff without going to Excel or Google Sheets or RStudio, something like that. Okay, now I can see we have enough time so that I can show you the demo how it works in reality, okay? One moment. Okay. This is like a test website. You see this is a user ID, which is supplied like randomly from time for us to have an option to see how the experiment looks like. So when how does it work under the hood? Like on page load, the web page asks CloudWatch evidently, like this is the demo project with features we want to test. The website asks evidently, should I enable this feature, which shows this table, or disable? And if it returns, yes, enable, this user is in the group of like B, then the front-end code will show it. And if we update the page, we'll see that this one is for user who is not, who's in the control group or reference group. And it works really, really simple on the code side. And on the side of the service, you can see your project, your feature, your experiments. This is one experiment live. Here, just for the sake of demo, the thing we are testing is the page load time. So if that feature decreases the performance of our application, and we can see that this is like data. You can see that the traffic is split 50-50, like 17 for disable and 18 for enable. And we can see that statistical significance is not yet achieved. That's all. We can dive really deep into the service, maybe in another session. But in fact, it is a good place to start, to my mind. It is a good place to start and hold, from one point of view, hold all your expertise on A/B testing. So not to outsource it to some like service which hides it under the hood. No, the expertise will be yours, but it can be that simple to start and grow with it. Okay, now I think the final words I want to say. I'd like to group maybe my thoughts on how to start the process and make it really useful and make it grow inside your company. Like colleagues said, it is a really important thing to get a corporate buy-in. So first of all, you as a leader of team or maybe company, you first should think about that A/B testing is not that simple as it's sold by someone. Like two button clicks and you will have like statistical significance. You're great. No, it's not that simple. Christopher elaborated on that, and you have to keep it in mind. And the second one, you should prepare the company environment. So game producers or product managers, they have to, at least from time to time, think about the future with tests in mind. So they, when they are coming with the feature, they should come up with something. How will I test? How will I test in the shortest amount of time, but to have the high significance? This is the job of producers. And on the other side of things, technical team should design the system, both backend and front-end and mobile apps and everything, console games, for them to be testable. Because nothing can be testable magically. You need to have some infrastructure inside your applications for the test to run smoothly. And if you can find an experienced partner, both from scientific side of things and from technical side of things, it would be really great because you will have a head start. Yeah. And as motivation for us, when you do quick and statistically significant tests, you like set to improve the product all the time, or quickly kill the dead branches of product and publish those which work and work statistically well. I think that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. Helpful and useful as well. Thank you, guys. Thank you all to the 3 amazing speakers. Let's support them with the emojis, with comments in the chat, with your questions. Allison, Chris, and Mike, thank you, guys. This has been very, very insightful. So now for the Q&A, right? We promised that. I'm gonna be voicing the questions in no particular order, maybe, right? So Allison was the first one. Allison, we have questions in the Q&A section. You can check them out. And the first one of them is, first of all, great presentation, of course. So you mentioned different strategies of playing around with bundles. Could you please expand on this with 1 or 2 maybe examples? Thank you.
Sure. So a bundle in a game is a bunch of resources that you put together and try to understand what provides the most value. I did realize in reading this question that I didn't talk about one important lever with your monetization pillar, which is actually balancing your in-game economy and understanding how many sources, how much of your in-game currency is going out the door, and how much is coming back in. So you're seeing some sources around that. And that's part of a bundle. How much are you giving away and for how much money? And tinkering with exactly what value your players are getting. I think it's very much related to, the resources that are in your game from an in-game economy balancing perspective for figuring out exactly how the bundles work. Typically, I think all of us as game players have seen you go into a game and you get a new user bundle, which gives you a head start in spending. Those are typically a small price, $3 or something like that, just to get started in spending. And that speaks to the frequency of purchases as well that you're trying to kick off from the very beginning. So providing enough value to get players to make their first purchase is a really important starting point for games with this type of monetization.
All right. Thank you. Hope this covers that one. Could you also, Allison, please say a few things about what is meant by demonstrating marketability? There was this term presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, good question as well. This brings in me back to the LTV calculator. It shows a lot of the variables involved here in terms of essentially what you're trying to show by showing that your game will be marketable is that you're going to be able to acquire users at scale profitably. So that is that very basic calculation of what is your LTV and what is your cost to acquire these users. That is demonstrating marketability, that you can get users and make money profitably off of them.
Awesome. Hope this covers that as well. Chris, we have got quite a question for you. So by the one and only Emin. So in terms of A/B test calculation, statistical significance in A/B testing regarding ARPU, ARPPU, non-binary values. So could you please advise on any type of calculator, and what type of methods do you usually use for ARPU, ARPPU, and any other mean values like, oh Jesus, non-parametric Mon-Whitney U-test or just t-test? I hope I got it correctly.
No. Yeah, that all made a lot of sense. So here's where I kind of show my bias as a personal bias as a data scientist. So my personal opinion, and there's actually an article I'll link in the comments section, is that in terms of statistical tests that you can run once you've got experimental data, and the emphasis is on experimental data, there's not a whole lot of difference between the chi-square test, the Mann-Whitney, the t-test, which is one of the ones that I linked in the Excel spreadsheet, in terms of performance. And when I say performance, I mean if you were to use a different metric or a different test every single time for a million experiments, you would end up rejecting the results pretty much the same amount of time, regardless of what type of test. All that to say, the type of test, in my opinion, as long as you've created a good experiment, is less important. It's certainly less important than creating a good experiment where the randomization is good and where you have effectively sampled, the treatment area. That said, in general, for binary data, so conversion rates, you want to use a chi-square test. And for continuous data, you want to use the Mann-Whitney or the t-statistic. Now, the Mann-Whitney is what's called a non-parametric measurement. And this means that you don't make any assumptions about the underlying distribution of your players. So, for example, in a t-test makes an assumption about the behavior of your players or the characteristics of your players. And for the most part, the t-test assumes normality, a normal distribution. So the advantage of parametric distributions is they don't have those types of parametric assumptions. That said, at the end of the day, they all perform pretty much the same regardless. Like, you could use a t-test on binary data and you'd probably be just fine. Best practices say, hey, you might as well use a chi-square test. So hopefully that kind of answers that question. And Mike, if you have anything, by all means, I think it'd be.
No, it's okay.
It answers it for me, at least. I mean, hope this helps you out. Just let us know in the comments if it does or doesn't. And we got another question for Chris, apparently by Allison.
Yeah.
So you may voice it yourself then.
I'm just wondering your thoughts around showing A/B test variants to new users coming in a game versus existing users, and what to take into account. When would you use one or the other, and what are some things to look out for really with either of these groups of players?
So is the idea, how do you differentiate? How do you properly account for the fact that new players are coming into the environment compared to old players, like contamination almost?
Yeah, exactly.
Your distribution is changing over time. I think, for me, that kind of gets into the timing question. If you run a very long experiment, the underlying distribution is changing. And so you actually pointed this out in your presentation. Your earliest players are going to have kind of the most positive behavior in your environment. They're going to be high spenders, they're going to be high retention, and these later players are more, these are people with the lowest retention values and the lowest monetization values, so like LTV. So that is definitely something you want to keep in mind. So I would say, in terms of, it obviously depends on the studio. Like if you're at AWS, I think this architecture that they've created actually kind of helps to solve and alleviate this problem. If you're a smaller studio, maybe you just want to make sure that you're timing that experiment properly, and then if you see like 25% user acquisition rate, maybe it's time to to pull back and redo an experiment or something like this. And that's kind of why A/B testing is a little bit awkward for a company that's super young and is maybe still experiencing huge amounts of user growth in their products, or their product is changing significantly.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Thank you both.
Thanks for the question.
Mike, I see you want to answer this particular one. Let me just voice it first. I've got a question regarding A/B testing from the marketing perspective. So the guys are a small indie studio and they don't get too many players yet. And at the moment they're gathering up the Steam page, are there any efficient ways to test the game page setup and its conversion, or do these methods might be useful in the estimation of the in-game content only? Please.
Yeah, thank you for the question. In fact, this question can be split to two parts. Like we can generalize it. First of all, what we can test. In this case, it is a Steam page. And in fact, I'm not a big expert in Steam APIs and something like that. And now you understand why I'm speaking about it. So to make a significant A/B test, no, not significant, any kind of A/B test, you need to do two things. You need to have an ability to split traffic automatically. So to split group A and group B and something like that. But what's more important is to get automatically to get the results. And this the results for both groups. To do it in Steam, you need to have an access to Steam, like to select the image, what to show to the special user which came. But I don't think you can do it right now. So you can build a page and drive traffic and see. So if you don't have an access to this part, you won't have an access to A/B testing. But as far as I know from other studios, they do kinds of A/B testing, and once from my games told me about it. What they do is they do like manual A/B testing. So they change in App Store pictures, and not in Steam, but it's kind of the same. You can do it, I think. Change manually the text and images on your page, and watch the metrics, given that everything else is the same, as far as I understand. So if your traffic sources are the same, is everything the same, but the change is your manual change in your cabinet, like personal cabinet in Steam. I think you can do kind of a manual test, at least, but it won't be too correct. How do you think, Christopher? I think it won't be very high quality.
So yeah, excuse me. So it's kind of interesting. I'm of the personal belief that especially early on, especially before you are going to get any reasonable feedback, I think that kind of the earliest version of an A/B test is really just community feedback. So if you're going to make some update to your, to your interface, and you have maybe a couple hundred, a couple thousand users, maybe that's a situation where you collect data from a Discord server. And this is actually one of the points that was brought up in that Navic podcast I mentioned, which I'm actually going to throw that link in the description as well. But I think this goes back to the A part of my presentation, where you need to figure out whether there's a technical feasibility there, and or you could just honestly, you could go into one of those power calculators and see, what am I really able to see if I were to run an A/B test? But you might be at the stage where just change something here. It's at this point, it's probably more of a feeling. It's probably more of a heartbeat on your community than it is a scientific endeavor.
All right, thank you both. Thank you, guys. Chris, we have another quick question for you. Speaking of ARPU, roughly on what sample sizes can we use this parameter for statistically reliable results? Thanks.
That is a good question. So first of all, it depends on the percentage change you're looking for. So if you go into one of those calculators, you can plug in your specific parameter. You can plug in the type of data. So if it's continuous data or if it's binary data, and you can type in the percentage change you're looking for, and that'll spit out the kind of sample size you want to sample in order to get a reliable estimate. Now, the sample size does not mean you can't run this experiment without this. It just means that in the infinite repeated sampling of this experiment, if you were to run it 1 million times, your result that you found this time would hold up 95% of the time. It's kind of a weird convoluted way to say things, but I think that especially with specific metrics, it's best to just go into one of these calculators. The TB article link that I sent also goes a little bit more into this statistical significance.
All right. Yeah, thank you all. So you guys can still ask a couple of questions through the Q&A. Do not hesitate. This is one of the best chances to get free advice from people way smarter than I am, at least. Yeah, so Allison, what product metrics are the most important to work with if I'm, say, a casual mobile games developer? So, people usually work with retention, DAU, RPPU, session length.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any advice on further?
I mean, in my talk, I did, of course, talk about the hero metrics behind each of these pillars, which are a starting point. I think that, rather than talk about specific KPIs, I might want to talk about tools a little bit more in terms of being able to dive into your data. So the KPIs are not super deep in a way, in that they're very standard for these concepts. Instead, it's kind of going in and slicing and dicing these things, really getting in, I think, getting a handle on all of the standard KPIs and then diving into them by breaking up your segments of users that you're looking at. What I'm trying to get at is segmentation in particular. So it's one thing to see what your DAU is, but it's another thing to see where your DAU is playing, for example, and what players have done specific actions in your game. If they've done played with a particular item, what have they done after that point, for example? So it's hard for me to say exactly what KPIs to look at, so much as just encouraging you to really dive in to look at the details behind them.
Got it. Thank you so much. So yeah, we have a quick question on what was the A/B test review by 2 authors of this year, Chris. Yeah, I see replying in chat and you're muted, mate, but yeah, that's all right.
I'll post it in the channel.
All right.
Yeah, it's a good one, and it'll lead to a bunch of other papers that you should, if you're interested in this stuff, you should probably go down.
Beautiful. Just to remind you all, we're going to have a recording of this on the Game Drive website, so do not be worried about that. Mike, are there any cases where A/B testing is redundant at the very least? What do you say? And this will probably be the last question, so yeah.
Yeah, partly answered that question. What, to my mind, the most important thing is the feasibility. So if you don't have enough traffic to test, you can have much traffic, millions of hits or something, or RPU, but the cohort for which you are making the feature could be really small. So first of all, you have to check if it is feasible, like statistically. And the second one is that I've seen plenty of examples where the infrastructure and the code itself, the platform code, was so non-feasible for this test. So you had to add plenty of small patches everywhere. So in several situations, in such situations, it's better to or improve your testing system and after that do a test, or just select another feature to test, because the bad consequences could be much worse than the results. Yeah, I think that's it. Alison, Christopher, how do you think?
I want to mention one perspective on A/B testing. I'm curious what you two think about it. There was a talk by Supercell, I believe, that have the Beacon platform. Like they were talking about their A/B testing, and what they were saying was that you run an A/B test and you have the majority of players like some variant, but then if you change your game to reflect that variant, you're actually leaving the other portion of players behind. They might have liked the other variant that you were showing to them. So they've done a lot of work in actually allowing for all of these variants to be happening in their game for different segments of users at the same time, which is that powerful, amazing segmentation engine that is at the top of the pyramid I was talking about. Just wondering what your guys' perspectives are on that, given that context.
Yeah, that brings up a really interesting, very, very cutting edge form of data analysis or data science, is kind of serving each individual person a different experience. Now this gets at kind of like, this is more machine learning AI than it is A/B testing. But if you know that there's two distinct groups that like two completely different things, and there's not a lot of margin between the two, there's not a lot of intersection, you might just serve up two different options. Now, the most obvious place for a technology like this is offering people different bundles. So, hey, here's a discounted bundle, or 99-cent SKU versus a $1.99 SKU. But you can imagine literally offering different people different experiences. And I also have another link that I'll put in the chat. But there's some really interesting work being done on this by Julian Runge, who works at Game Data Pros, and is at the Northeastern University. But yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, and in fact, I I do some generative AI stuff apart from plain analytics, and there are some, some maybe fantasies or hopes to make a hyper personalized games, to make hyper personalized, so that they won't have like two variants, but really different variants. While balancing economy, statistics, balance, and something like that. In game, I mean, in game statistics, in game balance, but the experience would be a bit different for everyone. And I think we can come to that point.
I wonder how players will adopt that in a way, because you also hear when you have variants are running A/B tests and players notice that they're getting one thing versus the other, that there can be like outcries in forums and whatnot. I think I would really like a very personalized experience if I weren't feeling those rough edges of where it's different. Sometimes you can feel that rough edge of level difficulty being turned up or something like that.
Yes. Level of difficulty could be adapted. So there are new games which don't have some kind of distinct easy, normal, hard, blah blah blah.
Yeah,
it just kept algorithmically, and I think it's something about it.
I always get upset when I realize the game is adjusting difficult on me, and I say, "Wait,
totally.
they're using their algorithms." I'm a disgruntled consumer. That's probably actually one of the most. That's probably where this whole entire kind of assortative, like, here you get this came from, is like match 3.
Yeah.
This is the first time that the speakers of the game drive session are actually communicating with each other, asking questions and answering them. We may all leave if you want, and you guys can go on.
It's fun to have data people all in the same room. So thank you.
Right. We have one more, and I see people are leaving. So, because we've been doing this for almost 2 hours, which is awesome. Alison, this is the last one, and it's for you. So, and it's a very good one as well. You mentioned that more time spent in the game equals to bigger potential for spend, right? So you think this is always true, since on games like Coin Master / Monopoly Go, etc., relying on short sessions, but multiple times per day, though?
Yeah. Short sessions multiple times a day, if you put those two things together, that's your total playtime per day. So it can be broken up in whatever way you, based on your game. So I do definitely get that strategy where you want people coming up back multiple times, but then the additive all the time together is what I'm talking about in terms of more time. That also has to do with retention, right? How much time gets played in the total lifetime of a player from the time they download it to the time they go away from your game forever. How much actual clock time have you held on to those players for? And having more of that as driven by session length and number of sessions per day is what can help you ultimately drive revenue.
All right. Do I see another? Yeah, thank you, Allison. That was just a thing.
Thank you.
I was scared for a second. Anyway, this has been it. Thank you guys so much. This has been truly insightful. This has been very interesting. Let's support the speakers in the chat with emojis. You can find all these beautiful people on LinkedIn. We're gonna have the recording as well. It's gonna be available once again on the GameDrive.com website. All the links have been shared. Wow, this has probably been the most insightful and action-packed online session of Game Drive so far this year. Thank you all who took part in this, and of course, special thanks to our speakers. Once again, we have had, Allison Billis, CEO of Game Analytics, talking about, using data to optimize your game's performance. We have had Christopher.
Much expect.
Yes. Of the ATMTA Inc. and Game Economist cast as well. Hey, Philip Black. Talking about the ABCs of A/B testing. And the last but not the least, we have had my dear friend Micah Shannon from AWS for Games, talking about A/B tests and sharing some case studies. Thank you all for this. Thank you all three. Please check the website for the next Game Drive events. We're going to have some more till the end of 2023. And before we end this session, let me remind you that if you are a mobile game developer who has a project maybe published on Google Play, and you're looking for any kind of support, consulting, and investments, you can submit your game on the aforementioned website, which is GameDrive.com. You can receive a comprehensive scope of expert evaluation from both My Games and My Games venture capital teams, as well as our experts, maybe, hopefully. And that's it. The sun is getting down in the amazing city of Limassol. Chilling this again. You may see by the, by my face during these almost 2 hours, how sun was getting a little bit more down and down. Thank you all. Have a beautiful rest of the day or night or whatever you have in the place you're based, and see you soon on any kind of game dev events, maybe Game Drive as well. Thank you guys and stay safe.
Thank you, everyone. See you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.